Today, we're going to look at a beautiful 1967 Plymouth satellite convertible located in Rogers, Arkansas. And to tell us all about it is Randy Underwood. Welcome, Randy.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it.
You bet. So, Randy's been a friend of mine for quite a few years, and we've taken several long road trips together. Randy, tell our viewers some of the road trips you've driven your satellite.
Well, I built this car to be a really nice traveling car, and we've taken it to Chicago and back from Arkansas. I have taken it to the Gulf Coast and back from Arkansas, and it's a really comfortable, nice driving car. We've enjoyed it, and I really wouldn't be afraid to drive it anywhere.
So, Randy and his wife have decided to downsize some, and Randy's asked me to sell his satellite for him. To do so, Randy's going to tell us all about the car. We're going to start with the body and then the engine compartment and work back. But before we start, can you just kind of give us a general overview of the car, Randy?
All right. Some people build these for really high performance, like running the quarter mile or something like that. This one's built for highway cruising and just cruising in general. I've put high gears in the rear end. Have set it up to be a really nice highway cruising car. I've put classic auto air in it, heat and air conditioning. Just made it really comfortable. I've put disc brakes on it that use components from other Mopar products, more modern front disc brakes. They're 11.75 inch rotors, for instance. They're about the biggest rotors you could get and stick with genuine Mopar parts, so that if I was out somewhere and had some kind of a weird problem, it's standard Mopar parts, not anything custom. So I've tried to make it something that was usable and that you didn't have to really worry that much about getting stranded somewhere with some exotic parts.
Sure. Now, one of the topics everyone always wants to know is the age and miles on the restoration. And I realize that, it doesn't all always happen at one stage. But can you give the viewers some idea on how many years ago, like the body and paint work was done and how many miles is on the drive line, et cetera?
For the paint and body work, that was done when I bought the car. I've had it 7 years, maybe 8, and I'm not really sure when it was done. Prior to that, it seems to be in good shape. It is a driver, so it's got a few imperfections in it, and it's certainly not a show car, but it is a really good condition driver. As far as the drivetrain, I did most of that work about, I think about 5 years ago. Went through its completely rebuilt engine and transmission, and completely rebuilt front end, and then new wheel bearings in the rear end, and those kinds of things. So I think that's about 5 years old. The mileage on that, to be honest with you, Tim, I'd have to look. It's probably, I don't know, 15,000 miles, maybe. Probably
Okay.
in the 10 to 15,000 mile range, I would just guess offhand.
Sure. Now, there's all different types of shoppers out there. Some put them on a enclosed trailer, unload it at a car show, put it back in the trailer, and go home. Others just drive their cars, even to work and back. And there's all different stages in between. So, would you classify the car as a show car or a driver?
It's definitely a driver. I would say it's a really nice driver. I have had it in some car shows, but I didn't put it there to try to win trophies or anything. It's just
Hmm.
it's really an interesting car, and it's a fairly unique car. I enjoyed taking it to car shows because you just don't see these very often. I did a little looking. They made about 32,000 satellites in '67, but only about 2,000 of them were convertibles. So you just don't run into one. In fact, in the time I've had this car, I don't think I've seen another '67 satellite convertible in my driving. I've seen other two-door hardtops, But this is a fairly unusual car, so it's kind of fun to show it off to people who a lot of people just don't even know what it is when they see it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Well, let's start at the engine compartment. We're going to work our way back. So, tell me about what's under the hood.
All right, right up front, kind of in the lower right hand side of the picture, you can see the compressor for the classic auto air conditioning system. A lot of people use vintage air. I went with classic auto air because they call it a perfect fit heat and air system specifically for the 66 and 67 Plymouth satellites. So the tubing was all bent, the evaporator and all of that, the condenser and all that was specially made to fit in a 67 Plymouth satellite. So that's one of the really good things I've done to it. That is a true 440 Magnum from a 1969 Dodge Charger RT. The casting date on the block is July of 68. So it's correct for a 69. I've got further information on the engine. The engine I took some time to try to build the engine really well as a solid engine, not really high performance any more than what it was naturally. A lot of people really go crazy on these and they make them where they're not very drivable and not very dependable. I tried not to do that with this one. All the rotating assembly has been balanced. The pistons are TRW Speed Pro forged pistons, and they were fit to each individual cylinder based on the clearance between that piston and that cylinder. We chose which piston in which cylinder, and we set them up for the clearance to be, I believe, between 5 thousandths and 7 thousandths for each one, if I remember right. The rings are filed to fit rings. By the way, when we rearranged the pistons, we did not rearrange the rods. The rods are still in the original order. It's a forged steel crank. That's what a 69 Dodge Charger RT engine would have had. I mean, it's the original crank for that engine. The crank's 1010, the block's bored 30 over. I used ARP rod studs and ARP main bearing studs. It's got a racer brown cam in it. The cam is specially ground for low RPM torque for a cruising car. It's got an electronic ignition. The distributor has adjustable vacuum advance. It's got an Edelbrock 750 CFM carburetor. I've got the needles and seats to tune it, and I have tuned it some. It may need a little additional tuning if somebody wants to try to maximize the gas mileage. I've kind of tuned it a little more towards power, but those things are all changeable. There's the Power Master alternator. It has 2 electric fans for the engine cooling and 2 electric fans for the air conditioning. There's 2 pushers and 2 pullers. And that Power Master alternator was one of the key components of making this all work well together. That's a 160 amp alternator, but it makes 100 amps at idle. So that helps. Yeah, there we go. That helps power all those fans if you're cruising slow or in really hot weather. That really helps.
Cool.
That was an Edelbrock aluminum intake as well. It does not have headers. I've had trouble with header gaskets leaking, so I used the factory-style cast iron manifolds, and I had them milled flat so they would seal well. Just trying to think about anything else. That's about it on the engine that I can think of right now, Tim.
I want to ask you about the color of the block. Now, I noticed it's orange instead of like a teal green. Can you tell me about that?
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes, a 67 Plymouth Satellite, if it had had a 440 originally, it would have been that kind of teal color, kind of light blue. This engine being from a 69 Dodge Charger RT, I did a lot of research and found a guy who had the actual paint codes for the correct color for a 69 Dodge Charger RT. So I've tried to make the engine correct for what it really is, even though
Hmm.
it's a couple of years newer than the car. Um, that's a pretty rare engine,
Well, I want to
and
talk
kind of
about that a little
wanted.
bit.
Okay.
So the true 440 Magnum from a 69 Charger RT, how rare do you think that engine is?
I actually looked that up just before this call. They made 18,000 69 Dodge Charger RTs, but a lot of them didn't survive very long. Um, and I found this engine from a guy who'd had it in a storage shed for 20 years. I don't know what happened to the original car that it was in. I do have the VIN number for it. It's stamped in the skirt on the block, and I can provide the VIN number. The last digit on the VIN number is a little bit hard to read. I haven't really been able to decipher it, but all the other VIN numbers are really clear, except the very last one. Something when they stamped it, just that last one didn't take very well. But it definitely is from a 69 Dodge Charger RT. The top of the deck, where it sticks out under the head, says HP2 on it. And I have learned that H means high performance, P means premium gas, and the two means it was made during the second shift. And I'll mention one other thing that this reminds me of. I built this to run on regular gas. I set the compression where it should run fine on regular gas. I've always run premium in it or mid grade, just because I've tried to stay away from the ethanol in the lower grades of gas. Since the car
Right.
has set quite a while since I've owned it, I typically run premium in it just to avoid the alcohol,
Hmm.
the ethanol that would be. I don't want that sitting in the car very long, but it should run fine. I've never heard it ping, never had any
Hmm.
troubles even running the mid grade, which I've done on some trips where I knew I was going to burn it up right away.
So back to the 69 Charger RT engine. I'm
Yeah.
not I'm not highly educated in Mopar engines and cars as much as I am General Motors. But as a child, I did like the TV show The Dukes of Hazzard. So, was the Dukes of Hazzard's TV cars, were they 69 Charger RTs?
That's exactly what they were. Yep. And
And
they used other cars in that show. That some of them were 68s and some of them were 70s. But yeah, the General Lee is supposed to be a 69 Dodge Charger RT, and a lot of them were. They ruined 300 of those cars making that series. They weren't all
300
real
of them.
RTs, though. And they didn't all have 440s in them. But
Right.
yeah, that's where a
Mhm.
lot of those Chargers went.
Tell me about this air cleaner. I like the looks of this cold induction air cleaner. Why is it on? And just tell me about this.
There was a time before I put the PowerMaster alternator on it that I was having a little bit of trouble. I thought it was an overheating problem, and I thought maybe sucking in hot air under the hood was contributing to it. So I went to this cold air intake. Didn't make any difference. That wasn't the problem. My problem was the four fans were pulling the voltage down and making the electronic ignition falter, and it
Mm,
was spitting and coughing at idle speeds and slow cruising speeds. It was fine on the highway.
hmm.
So it took me a while to figure that out. And I put this in during the time I thought I had a heating problem. I also put this radiator in during that time. That's an aluminum Champion radiator that's rated for 700 horsepower. And I've
Mm,
never had any overheating problems with it. I was wrong about it being an overheating problem. It was a low
hmm.
voltage problem. But yeah, and I might mention the chrome on that air cleaner. It's hard to tell in the picture, but it's not perfect. The
Hmm.
chrome is yeah, it's not show quality, but
Hmm.
it is what it is.
I think it looks really cool and I like it. I just wanted to point that out. Let's move on to the interior. So I'm going to go forward here. And while you just tell us about the interior, I'm going to just slowly go through some photos.
Okay. All right. I really haven't done much to the interior other than replace the carpet and put the seat belts in. It's got 5 seat belts. this is a standard interior for a Plymouth Satellite. The Satellite was the upscale version of the Plymouth line in the two doors. They made Belvedere 1s and Belvedere 2s. This was kind of the nicer car. The GTX, they call the gentleman's muscle car. And the GTX typically was built on a Belvedere. I don't know if they built any GTXs on satellite platforms or not. So the GTX was kind of the higher performance version, but not such a fancy car. So this interior is duplicate of the original, which was kind of the fanciest interior. Being the Satellite was kind of the fanciest car. There's one of the air conditioner vents, and the air conditioning system that I put in, Classic Auto Air, has those vents under the dash at the corners, and then in the center of the dash, it has vents that are very similar to the originals. They're in the original location, and they're almost the same shape as the originals. It also has an original radio. Those miles are not accurate. I don't know what the true mileage on the car is. I'll mention that.
Okay.
Yeah, I have no idea. That control right there for the heat and air conditioning, the bottom colder and higher temperature slider works just like original. The fan works just like an original, but that top controller, this car didn't originally have air conditioning, and that top controller works a little bit different because it turns it off in kind of the center, like where it is there. It runs the air conditioner, and then to the right, it runs defrost. So that works a little bit differently. Okay. Also, the alternator, alternator indicator on the original setup was an ammeter. So it ran the entire alternator output up through the firewall, through the dash, and then back to the battery. That's kind of a dangerous situation when you put a high amperage alternator in, so I changed it. That doesn't work anymore. I've got a voltmeter on it under the dash.
Find it here. I think
there it is.
I don't think I put a picture of it. I did not put a picture of it, but it's under the dash. Yes, I've seen that.
Yeah. Yep. There's a voltmeter and an oil pressure gauge there under the dash, so that the full output from that high output alternator doesn't have to come through the firewall and up to the dash.
Actually, it almost seems like a fire hazard to be pushing 150 amps through a small wire up to the dash.
Absolutely. And that's why modern cars don't have ammeters anymore. They all have voltmeters for that very reason. Yep, exactly. Yeah, so that's the original radio.
I like the looks of the original AM radio, and I know you've got a stereo underneath, but I just like the looks of the original AM radio in the dash.
Yeah, I like that too. And so I didn't put an aftermarket stereo in that place. I don't know if that radio works or not. I've never hooked it up. But I put an aftermarket stereo in under the dash and tried to make it look as nice as I could to kind of blend in. And that's a nice JVC stereo. It's got Bluetooth. It'll link up with your phone. It also has a remote control, which I really like. You can adjust the volume, change the station, change from AM to FM to Bluetooth, all with a remote control. So as you're driving down the road, you really don't even have to look at the radio if you're searching for channels or something. I've actually put that exact same stereo in my pickup truck too. I really like that.
Okay. So it's small in the picture, but I mentioned this to you on the phone the other day. I got in your car and I heard this noise. I thought, what's this noise? And I got to listening around, and your mechanical clock still works. And it's been so long since I've heard a mechanical clock work, I was confused. So I just think that's really cool that right in the center of the dash, your mechanical clock still works.
You know, I've never done a thing to that, and it has always worked. When I store the car, a lot of times I will disconnect the main battery cable to keep it from running the battery down as it just sits. If you drive it every 2 or 3 days, you don't have to worry about that. But when it sits for weeks, it will run the battery down if you don't disconnect it. And so the clock's not always set right, but every time I hook the battery back up, it takes off running again.
I just think that's cool. So I'm going to move to, there's those center air conditioning vents above the radio that you installed. So
that's the factory location for those. The original vents in a car that originally had air conditioning, I think the vents would have been a little bit slanted on the outside edges. So they're, if somebody's a purist, they might notice those are not factory, but they're very close.
Okay. I'm going to move forward. And no car is perfect. And I want to point this out. This is the seat for the driver's seat. And what are we looking at here?
That's one of those things where you go, no. I sat down with a screwdriver in my pocket one day and it poked a little hole in the seat. And I really have meant to fix that 1,000 times, and I just never have. That needs some repair there.
I looked online on Amazon. It seems like you can buy everything in Amazon. And I found a little car upholstery repair kit. I think it's like $17. And you put a layer down below. You just kind of push it through, put in the adhesive filler, dye it. But black should be really simple. Looks like a simple job, maybe 30 minutes to an hour. But yes, to keep it from getting bigger, it should probably be addressed, but it looks like it could be a simple fix as well.
It's actually been there for years, and I haven't seen it get any larger. Yeah. And I forget about it, and then I think, sometimes I think, I ought to fix that. I've seen little kits like you're talking about. I've seen some of them where you put kind of a vinyl paste in there and cover it with a sheet of plastic that has whatever design your seats have got, and those are almost smooth. They may have a little bit of grain, and then you put an iron on it, and it sets that paste into a solid or flexible solid. And I've always thought about doing that, and I totally forgot about it when this was coming up.
Well, let's move back. We're looking at the trunk now, and the trunk is really nice and clean. Tell us about what's in the trunk compartment.
All right. That's the amplifier for the speakers. If you've ever listened to a radio in a boat or in a convertible that didn't have an amplifier, most stock head units just won't put out anywhere near enough power to make the stereo sound good. I've got a higher powered speaker in the dash, and I've got 2 under the seats, and this drives those to get some good sound. I will mention while we're here, when I put that high-powered alternator in, I got a little bit of alternator whine in the stereo. And when you turn it down, you can hear it. I've put noise filters on the head unit, and I've done that just recently, and it didn't completely fix it. It took about half of it out. I think it needs a noise filter on the power line going into this amplifier, too. That'd be my guess. I never had that problem till I put the really good alternator on, and I guess it puts out a little bit of whine. Yeah, the jack, lug wrench is in there. The spare tire is underneath the floor. I've also got some spare parts underneath the floor that I carry with me sometimes, just some Mopar specific parts. The trunk, the paint inside the trunk is not as good as the paint outside the car. That is a lock box that I've installed in the trunk. It's bolted to the floor, and with the key, the whole box comes out of that little bracket, and then you can open the box up. One of the concerns you might have when you travel with a convertible is the vulnerability of somebody breaking into a convertible. It's just not quite as secure as a hardtop. So I put this little lockbox in there if you had some money or rings or your house keys or something you wanted to lock up. It gives you a place to keep it more secure than it would be. And as a result, when I drive the car, I tend not to lock the doors. I tend just not to leave anything in the car that's very valuable where it could be accessed through opening the doors. And I've never had anybody cut the top to try to get into the car that way. Right. And in fact, I've never had anybody open the doors as far as I know, but I've done this as kind of a precaution when you think about driving a convertible.
Sure. All right. Well, now we're going to go underneath. So here it is up on a car lift, and we just have a couple of photos. The under chassis, when I was under it, looked really nice and clean. Again, it's not a trailer queen that never gets driven, because I drive my cars too, and when you drive them, they get dirty. I was actually surprised at how nice and clean your under chassis is. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about, here's a couple of pictures of the floor pans that I shot.
Yeah, the car was undercoated when I got it, and there are a few places where the undercoat is flaking off a little bit. There's some little spots where you can see some rust that was under the undercoat, but I haven't seen anything bad anywhere. Haven't seen anything structural all around the spring mounts, the rear leaf spring mounts, and the front suspension mounts is all really solid. The only thing I've seen has been really minor. So you
Hmm.
know, I wouldn't want to say it's 100% rust free, but I haven't
Hmm.
seen anything of any concern under there.
Sure.
The rear leaf spring, that's a new gas tank. The rear leaf springs, I've had them re-arched and added another leaf.
Let me
It
catch
does.
up. I've got a picture of those. Right. Oh, I just went
Okay,
by it. There we go. Right
there we
there.
go.
So, yeah, I noticed
I've,
you've got air shocks on here, and you said, I really don't put any amount of air in there other than, just a minimal amount because of the springs. So I know I kind of interrupted you, but can you tell us about that?
yep. When I got the car, it was relying on those air shocks quite a bit to keep the rear end up. It was kind of sagging a little in the rear end. So I had those springs re-arched and put an extra leaf in there. The main leaf is still the original one, but the second leaf is significant, adds some significant strength to it. And so, yeah, I don't
Hmm.
really need the air shocks anymore. I keep, I don't know, maybe 30 pounds in them or something just to let them work a little bit, just to keep them
Hmm.
inflated. But yeah, they're
Okay.
they're pretty much unnecessary now. Um,
I'm going to go back a couple. Yeah, here's the rear end. So tell us about, I think you mentioned this at the very beginning, but tell us about, the rear end approximate gear ratio, whether it's a limited slip or sure grip, I guess, or an open. Tell us about the rear end.
okay, when I bought the car, it had a 355 Sure Grip in it, and the Sure Grip is a really nice rear end, really desirable for somebody that wants to drag race or something like that. Stoplight to stoplight race or something illegal. But I didn't really want that low ratio because when you get it out on the highway and try to run 65, 75 miles an hour down the interstate, the motor was really spinning way faster than was comfortable. So I switched it to 274 gears. It's an open differential now, but that doesn't make any difference to the way I drive it.
Hmm.
So with the 274 gears, it's really nice running down the interstate now.
Hmm.
It's and with the low end torque the engine's got, you just don't need to have the engine spinning really fast to get really good performance on the highway.
Right. So, and you mentioned you've got a new gas tank.
Yeah, I actually got rear-ended on a trip we took to Branson one time, and it messed up the a little bitty car ran under the back of me basically, and it messed up the back bumper in the gas tank and my tailpipe. It didn't really hurt much else. There were a few little things that I could tell a potential buyer about to get into the details of it, but I replaced the gas
Hmm.
tank and replaced the rear bumper. That's an original 67 Plymouth Satellite rear bumper that's been re-chromed. Um,
Hmm. Okay. And let's see, we already gone through the floor. Let's move forward. Here looks like you're 727.
yep, 727 automatic transmission. When I got it, the kickdown was not working right when I put the transmission in behind the big block. And I have bought a cable to make the kickdown work better, and it does work better, but I don't have it adjusted quite right. I, I'm really selling this car because I've run out of time. I've got too many other things pulling me in different directions. It needs a little tweaking to get the kickdown working just right. It shifts pretty good, but the
Mm-hmm.
kickdown's still not working right. But with that cable, it should be a matter of just adjusting it to get it just right. It drives great, and if you get on it, it really shifts good, but
Hmm.
it's not quite adjusted right, and I just haven't taken the time to tweak it.
So the 727 was the Mopar workhorse for the big engines.
Yep, they never made an overdrive transmission to go behind the 440. So, yep, this was the strong automatic transmission that was the match for the 440.
And here we're up to your 440 engine again, and you've already kind of told us about building it. It looks really nice and clean underneath. Again, it's a driver; it's not a professional show car, but for a driver, it looks incredibly clean.
Yeah, I'll mention from this view, it reminds me the 440 is a similar design to the 426 Hemi, and it's close enough that that's a Hemi oil pan. It's a 6 quart Hemi oil pan, and it also
Hmm.
has a Hemi pickup, which the pickup connection has been drilled and tapped for a half-inch diameter pickup instead of the smaller stock 440 oil pump pickup. So this has kind of got the Hemi oil pan and oil pump pickup set up. While we're here, I'll mention the engine and the front suspension is all mounted on the K member there that you can see towards the bottom of the picture or towards the front of the car. And I took the K member out. I completely seam welded it. It's two pieces that are spot welded together. I seam welded the entire perimeter of the K
Hmm.
member. I welded in gussets and strengthening braces around the steering box and around the critical parts there, and put in polyurethane bushings. The lower control arms have got bracing welded into them, and it really stiffened up the front suspension to try to keep any flexing out of it.
Hmm.
Not that it was that bad stock, but these were just kind of some high performance upgrades for handling that I did to it
Sure.
while I had the key member out.
Okay. We've already gone through there. Let's look at the front brakes. Now, you put disc brakes in the front.
Yeah, the 67 Plymouth Satellite did have disc brakes as an option, but the calipers are a really obsolete design and you really wouldn't want them. I had a
Mm.
67 Plymouth Fury convertible that had factory disc brakes, and they're kind of a weird setup that is hard to get parts for. So, what I did on this car, instead of it had drum brakes when I got it, instead of converting it to factory 67 Plymouth disc brakes. This is an amalgamation of different Mopar parts. The spindles are from a later model A body. Uh, Satellites are a B body. And let me think if I can remember that. I believe the rotors are from a Cordoba that would have had a 400 in it. I've got this information in a sheet that I kept all this, and the
Hmm.
calipers are from a Challenger. So they're 11.75 inch rotors with Challenger calipers, basically. So they're off the shelf parts. I really did not want to go
Hmm.
with some kind of custom brake component that if you had a caliper seize on you out on the road somewhere, you'd be trying to get some kind of custom parts. These are all the whole thing is Mopar parts. And of course, new bearings and seals. And the
Hmm.
rear, I did new bearings and seals also, but it's still drum brakes in the rear. And those wheels are they're genuine Foos. I think their model name is Legends. Foos Legend wheels. Um, I think they're 7 inch, if I remember right, with 4 inches of back spacing. But I've got that written down. I don't remember
Okay.
exactly.
Hmm. Yeah. So, what size rims are these?
These are 17-inch wheels, and
Okay.
you couldn't. The car originally would have had 14-inch wheels, but you couldn't clear
Hmm.
these brakes with a 14-inch wheel. You might have cleared them
Sure.
with a smaller wheel, but I went with these to get a more modern tire and a more modern
Hmm.
look to make it kind of a resto mod looking setup.
Well, it just looks beautiful. And before we go, do you have any more information about the car that you want to share while we're online?
One other thing popped in my head. The heads on the engine are 906 heads, which have hardened exhaust valve seats. I forgot to mention that. When you go from a car that was made before they eliminated leaded gas to a car that's running on gas that doesn't have any lead in it, that's another thing to consider. And I forgot to leave that out.
Hmm.
Or I mean, I forgot and left that out. So yeah, I
Hmm.
just I just built this car to drive and have fun in. It is a fun car. It gets lots of looks. There's some unique features about it. It's a pretty rare car. Um, the turn signal indicators are up on top of the fenders towards the front of the car. That's a very unique thing. Lots of people that go for a ride in that, especially at night, they'll see those turn signal indicators, and they've never seen that before. Um,
Mm-hmm.
One other thing I'll mention, it has a little bit of GTX flavor to it. The guy that had it before me was doing that. Those hood scoops are GTX style. The gas filler cap is GTX style. That gas filler cap is the kind of cap you might see on a Challenger these days. But the first place that Chrysler ever used those caps was on a 67 Plymouth GTX or a 67 Dodge Coronet RT. So this is kind of where that cap would have started out. The car's not really a GTX clone, and I considered buying a GTX before I bought this, but I really wouldn't want to drive a car that expensive and where the miles would be counted against its value so
Mm-hmm.
severely. I wanted something I could drive and enjoy, not worry about the miles, and not be such an expensive car that you were afraid to drive it and enjoy it. This one really is nice to drive. My wife likes to drive it, with power steering, power brakes, all that. It's very comfortable. And I'm 6'6", and it's kind of hard to find a car that's that comfortable for somebody my size.
Yep. And let's talk about the GTX clone a little bit more. What for visually? What would really be involved for somebody to visually clone this to a GTX? How much would be involved?
Not really a whole lot. There's a couple parts that'd be hard to find, but there's not anything really big missing. If this had been a 67 GTX, there would have only been two engine choices. It would have been a 426 Hemi or a 440 Magnum. Actually, in the Plymouth, they called that the Super Commando, but it was the same engine as the Dodge Charger Magnum that's in it. Of course, it would have been a 67 model engine. But the engine is the 440. It would be correct for a GTX. There's badges on the front fenders on a GTX that this does not have. There's a badge on the glove compartment that this doesn't have. It would have the hood scoops and the stripes. The speedometer, a 67 GTX would have had a 150 mile an hour speedometer instead of a 120 mile an hour speedometer. I've never seen a 150 mile an hour GTX speedometer for sale. I don't know what that would cost.
Mm-hmm.
You can get a sticker, though. You can change to a clear panel in the speedometer, and you can get a sticker that goes to 150 miles an hour. And I guess you can re-gear the speedometer where it would be 150. So you could try
Yeah.
to duplicate that if that was your desire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tim, I can't think of anything else. I think the rectangular exhausts would be GTX.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I can think of. There might be something I'm not thinking of. The air cleaner would have said Super Commando on it,
Right. Yeah.
if it did a GTX.
Well,
But other than that,
if a person wanted to build a 1967 GTX convertible, I think you're 9/10 of the way there.
yeah,
Um,
that's probably
if a
correct.
person wanted to build a clone, I mean, nobody's going to drive a 67 GTX convertible on a road trip. I mean, nobody's going to do that,
Exactly.
But if a person just wanted a real nice driver that appears to be a 67 GTX convertible, I think you're a long ways to having that done. Before we go, do you have any other closing comments?
I'll tell you, if there's a buyer who's interested in this, I'll be glad to tell them. I've probably said much more than the average person wants to hear, but if somebody's really interested, I'll tell them everything I know about it. I'll be totally honest about it. And, I wouldn't want them to be disappointed with any aspect of the car. As
Right.
we've said before, it's not perfect, but it looks pretty good as a driver. And I've
It sure
enjoyed
does.
having it. Maybe somebody would wonder why I'm selling it. One of the main reasons is my wife decided she wanted a 57 Chevy. And we've had one for, I think, 5 years. And it's taken this long for us to really decide we need to cut back down to one car again. And
Hmm.
my wife has chosen she'd prefer the 57 Chevy. It's a two-door hardtop Bel Air, so it's something. It took something like that to pull us away from this. I guess is the way to say it.
Well, thanks for joining us, Randy. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. I know you got a lot going on, and it's really great that the owner and builder of a car can talk directly to a potential buyer to be able to go through the photos and details of the car. So, thanks for doing that.
Sure, Tim, and thank you for helping me find the right person for this car. It's a fairly
Mhm.
unique car, and I hope we find somebody that would really be pleased with it.
Well, here's your chance to grab a beautiful and rare 1967 Plymouth Satellite Convertible powered by a true 440 Magnum from a 1969 Charger RT. That's not something you're going to find on every street corner. So, if you'd like to view more photos or videos, just visit gasvillusa.com or feel free to call me at 479 636 7111.